Superheroic bowling, the classic kata in AngularJS. Hello, I'm Andrew Greenberg, and today we're going to take the first step to building this bowling application patterned after the classic bowling kata. We're going to exercise our TDD skills and develop some new ones. Today we're going to build out our programming environment and a scaffold application courtesy of the folks at Yeoman who have an Angular generator that's terrific. And then we're going to configure the Karma test runner, which comes with AngularJS. And then we're going to create an interesting object, an Angular integration test subject, which is to say a DOM fragment that we can manipulate with jQuery. So we can click on an object and the DOM fragment will change in accordance with the application code. In this way, we can do an outside-in test development without actually having to set up the complexity of an end-to-end server or a Cucumber-style server. But we'll run it completely within our unit test framework. Then we're going to use that to drive out a data entry feature and learn a little bit about the basic tenets of TDD by learning to slime, which is to say we'll learn that when you have a test that's red and there's a trivial, easy way to actually make that test green by even adding, say, just a simple constant, you do that. You do the simplest thing that could possibly work. And if you want to write bigger code, if you want to go faster, don't do that. That's what you need to learn to resist. TDD will get it for you. You just need to write more tests. As the tests get more specific, then your code will get more generic. Thanks, Bob Martin, for that pithy line. And in that way, you'll develop solid, strong, well-documented TDD code. So let's get going and write some code. Let's build this thing. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is find a place to build it. There it is, makedir bowling.js. Let's go into our directory and let's set up Yeoman to build an Angular application scaffold. It's going to ask me a couple of quick questions. I'm simply going to accept the defaults and let it run. And so that you don't have to gouge your eyes out with this, I'm going to just let it run quickly to the very end, and I'll see you there. All right, and so now that's all done. Let's go ahead and take a look at the application. Actually, let's just go ahead and see it working. Grunt build will build a production version of the application that the Yeoman people have provided for us. It should take just a few minutes here. And then when it's done, we're going to go ahead and tell it to start up a server, capture a browser, and run our application in that browser. Now, while we're doing development, if we wanted to, it would go ahead and refresh this every time we made a change. Allo, allo, remember those words, please. You have the HTML5 boilerplate, the AngularJS, and the lovely Karma test runner installed, and it tells us to have fun coding, and we always do. So let's get going and write our application and do exactly that. So the first thing I want to do is configure the test runner so it's working for us with this application. We're going to tell it to use the base path app so that the files as seen by the test runner will look just like the root of the application directory, which means that our files now will have to have that app prefix deleted. So let's go ahead and do that here. And then we're going to delete this mock since we're not going to use it, and we're going to tell it to pick up its test by going to what for the test driver will be the parent directory. It'll be our app directory here, and we're ready to go. Now we're going to add just two things here. Bower components jQuery, jQuery.js. Won't be using the jQuery in the application, but we will be using it in the tests because it's convenient to describe and manipulate the DOM in our test system. And then also here, I'm going to tell it to go to Views, and pick up all the HTML files from that. This may surprise you. We're not going to ask the browser to take a script with HTML in it and understand that. We're going to run this through a preprocessor that's going to take those HTML templates and generate a JavaScript file, a Angular module actually, that when loaded up and instantiated will actually feed the template cache with that text. That way we don't need a server running at the same time. The next thing we're going to do here is go make two of the changes. You don't need to make these. I will. If you have an IDE that automatically manages Karma, you may not want to run the auto watch feature. And then finally, instead of Chrome, I'm going to use Phantom JS so that my screen doesn't shift back and forth during the screencast. It's just a convenience here. And we're done with that. So now when we run Karma Start, it should be green. And it is. Congratulations, we now have this working. Let's go ahead and open up a new directory here, and let's get started. Okay, so there is no integration test feature that comes with the Yeoman group, so let's go ahead and make a folder for it. Make a directory in the test folders, in their test specs. Let's call it our integration tests, and let's go ahead and write one. Okay, we got to describe something. Why don't we describe the integration of the bowling application? And just to make sure that this is all working fine, let's go ahead and make a test that would help us. It should know truth and we will expect true to be truthy. The purpose of this is just so that we can make sure that the Karma is looking at this file, watching it, and behaving correctly. If so, it would be green. It is. You see it says that it's executed 2 of 2 tests now, so all is running well. Now it's time to build the subject under test for this application object, which I talked about. Let's start with a plain old JavaScript object, and let's test it to do something. It should have the correct header. And we'll expect our application when we go looking for the H1 header. We will look at its text, and we'll expect that text to be Superheroic bowling. And that should fail, and it does. It does spectacularly because app doesn't respond to find. It's a plain old empty object. Of course it won't. Just for convenience, let's go ahead and change that message so that we know what we're hunting down. We can make something that responds to find. It'll be this plain jQuery object. And now we see that the test is changed. We changed the message to something getting us closer to the result. It expects the empty string to be Superheroic bowling. So now it's time to build the object itself and make sure that it's actually tracking the code of our application. AngularJS provides 2 incredibly helpful helper functions. One is called module, the other is called inject. They give us access to the innards of Angular so that we can build these test subjects and run our tests environment in isolation. And so what we'll do is before every test in this folder, that's the before each function here, we're going to run module, which is they've exposed that on the root object here. And we'll tell it to go bowling.js app is the name of the module created for us by Yeoman. They picked up the name bowling.js from the directory in which we created this. And then finally, before each, we're going to inject into a function that we create the root scope and the compiler. So we're getting those from the ng library, and it will just give us that in its raw form. And now it's time to build. So we create an HTML object that's going to be the AngularJS object to compile. Simple as can be. Create a div. It'll be ng app, and load up the bowling.js app. And then a div, which is going to be the ng view. It's complaining that I messed up a parse somewhere. Where did I mess up? Yeah, well, of course I have. I haven't closed those brackets. We'll do that when we're done here. Now it's time to set the app, and that'll be equal to the result of compiling the HTML and linking that with a scope. Let's just take the root scope and have it build us a new one. We're not going to be manipulating that scope in these tests, so that's all we need here. And then finally, an application in AngularJS will only actually go through its paces if we do the digest cycle. So we initially, for our bootstrap, need to ask it to digest this. So we go ahead and tell the root scope to run the digest cycle. And now we should have our object. Let's see what happens. Still, it doesn't like this because I'm missing a parenthesis. Now, something bad happened. Let's go take a look and see what bad happened. Well, here it erred. It failed out because it was running an unexpected request for views main.html. Unsurprising, since there is no server for it to get access to. But here's the part we were discussing. We actually have preloaded all of our templates, which is the file that I've highlighted here. And now we just need to tell Angular to go ahead and load those up too. So before each module, and here we want the template, views main.html. And with a little bit of luck, we should be green. No, we're not green. But remember, I told you to remember this. Allo, allo. The message has changed, and it's changed in a great way. It's actually running the Angular application so that we can test it. And it's saying allo, allo, which is the text of the scaffold that was already given to us. This is no surprise. So let's go ahead and open up the HTML, the main.html file that we loaded there, and see what we can see. So vnew views main, app views main. And let's just switch those windows over so we have the tests on the left. That's just my inclination. And there it is. Look, allo, allo. Just like we have in our test failure here, the message expected allo, allo to be superheroic bowling. So let's go ahead and just get rid of all of this cruft. We're coding because we're red. You can't code unless you're red, and you can only write that much code that's necessary to make it work. So we got rid of the cruft, and now we're going to change that message to superheroic bowling, and that should be green, and it is. And now we've got the test running and our test subject running. This is very exciting. We can now write real code. So while we're green, let me get rid of some of this cruft. I'm going to get rid of the test case. I'm going to keep that one handy, although we may want to get rid of it later. We may not. Ordinarily, I don't like specifications that look like this, that actually specify how the thing is supposed to appear. I leave that to designers. If we write tests specifying the view, we're going to write write brittle tests because designers will always find more elegant, clever ways to be able to make things look beautiful. And I don't want to get in their way. I just want to make sure the functionality is specified. So in my view, so long as you're green, you can always do any design work you can. And I shouldn't be organizing this thing in such a way as to actually create tests that measure the beauty of the application. If I can get away without specifying it, I will always try to do so. But for now, let's just keep this here because it keeps us anchored and focused. We're now ready to describe some functionality. Let's do it. So data entry. Our application somehow is going to have to be able to say, here's the game that I rolled, so that we can then give it in response the score information for that program. So let's see what we got. Describe data entry, our function. And now we're going to have another subdescribe for its input means. What are our buttons, clickable things? Again, we're not going to define what the designer uses for input. We just really are going to care that the input means is going to happen by a click. And the may come back to us and say we don't want clicks, we may want points, we may want shuffles or some kind of gesture. Then we're going to have to negotiate. But for now, we probably will allow the designer enough freedom if we simply say the input means has to click. And so let's go ahead and write a test. It should have 11 clickable roll means. And again, we don't know what the designer is going to decide, so let's not specify it beyond that for now, except to say that these 11 clickable things are going to be called roll, at least by their class. So we're going to expect our application to have objects with the class roll, and we're going to just look at how many of them there are for the purpose of this test. Expect there to be 11 of them. And we got red, which is great because that means we can program. And see, the message says expected 0 to be 11. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some code. So I'm going to create divs just because I can. I don't really want to give the designer more direction than is absolutely necessary. It's going to have the class roll. That's one of them. And yes, the message is it expects 1 to be 11. So now we need there to be 11 of them. So let's use ng repeat for pins in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And the reason that I chose this particular number 11 is the gutter roll plus 1, 2, 3, 4 pins all the way up to a strike or spare. So that way you can tell the application how many pins got dropped next. And we're green. So we're ready for our next test. What's our next test? Well, we do know we're going to want some kind of resetting function. So it should have one clickable reset means. We're not defining behavior, just its existence. We'll do its behavior in just a minute when we've explained how we're going to have output so we can define its behavior. app.find.reset length to be 1. It should be red, and we are. It's expecting 0 to be 1. Let's fix that. Div class equals reset, same as before. And that ought to be enough. Yes, and it is. So we're green. Okay, so we've got our input means. Now let's do our output means. And our output means it should have an initially empty display of roles. Let's call it a list of roles. And rather than have, let's say it should display. Trying to use our verbs a little more responsibly here. Okay, so we're going to expect app.find, and what are we going to call it? Roles display. And it should have text, which will be the empty list. Notice we describe things here in terms of clicks and text because that's all the browser actually does. We're defining the application at a pretty significantly high level. Okay, so let's close out those brackets. And we should be red, and we are. It expects the empty string to be the bracket. So let's go ahead and create our output means. Div class equals roles display. And now somehow we need it to be the empty list. Now, I know what you want to do. I do. I get it. I know you want to go ahead and do something with curly braces and create some kind of controller and start writing code. You don't have to, and the test didn't make you. There's an easier way to do it. Let's slime it. But, Daddy, that's not a list. No, Andrew, it's not a list. It's text. But that's all that we've asked, is for it to introduce text and that it would be that text to represent the empty list. But it's not doing anything. Yes, it is. See? It's making the test pass. But it's not what we want. It's what our tests specify. And if we want more than that, we need to write more tests. So let's go ahead. It should display a gutter roll. Relax. We're going to write tests soon enough, write code soon enough that's going to do what we need it to do. Let's see what we got. Okay, so it should display a gutter roll. We're going to click on a button. So we'll click on roles, get the 0th element, the 0th clickable object, and click on it. And then when we do click on it, we're going to expect the roles display. I know how ugly these tests look. We're going to fix that too in a moment. Now to be 0 in a list. And we've got red. So now we can go back. Well, can we slime this? Yes, we can. If we slime this, it would make this test pass, but it would make the other test fail, which means we really need to do something else. And if you look and stare at the HTML, there isn't anything that hangs out as obvious. So now it's time to write our curly braces. We're going to go ahead and use Angular to substitute from the scope the value of roles, which will be our list. And of course, we're still broken because we haven't actually done anything in the controller to change the value of our roles piece of the scope. So let's go ahead and edit app, scripts, controllers, main, and there it is. And by the way, there's that stuff from the original test. Can't delete anything or refactor. Why? Well, because we're red. We can only make changes to code that don't change functionality when we're green. So go ahead and change scope to that empty bracket. Okay. Well, actually, let's do this. No, let's go ahead and finish this. Now we know we need to handle something for the click. Because right now, it's got no behavior associated with the click. And let's tell click to run add role, the add role function. Okay. And now let's go ahead and define the add role function. Okay, and that'll change scope.roles so that it'll make the test pass, and we're going to slime it. But Andrew, yes, I know. This is all that the test requires for now. If you want more than that, we're going to need to change the test, and we will. We're going to do that again and again. Okay, but it's not passing. Why isn't it passing? Let's go ahead and look at the test. The test wants roles display to that. We're changing roles when the add role function is called. Is it being called? No, it's not. Well, that means that the role is not being called, so we go back and take a look here. And we do have ng-click equals add role, ADDROLL, and that's correct. And scope.roles. There's no reason this test is not passing, but there is a reason because it's not passing. So let's go look at the test, and we see we picked the wrong thing to actually click. Now we click it, and the test passes, and we're green. Now we added that code. I think we deleted it before I came back here. Yeah, so that log is not there. We're green, so we can clean up a little things. Let's get rid of this cruft, which we no longer need. And it's red. Well, the reason it's red is because there was that other test. Where is it? Well, it tells us the test is currently in this main.js file. So let's go etest spec controllers main. And there it is. It's a test we don't need, don't require. Let's delete it. There we go. Okay, let's go back to our integration tests here. And let's go back to that. Excellent. So we've got a guttural, but we've got a slime. Well, the way to get rid of slimes is to specify more detail. Not to write a broader test, a narrower test, or an additional functionality to force it to go ahead. As the tests get more specific, the code will get more generic. That's the bylaw. By the way, thanks to Bob Martin, who I first heard that line. The tests get more specific, and the code gets more generic. So it should display a pin drop role. Sometimes when you're doing this kind of forcing, and forcing is my language for making the code more generic in an obvious way, I'll just write an additional test in the previous one. I would change should display a role into this, but you know, it's not necessary to do that every time. So find.role eq1.click. And now we'd expect app.find roles display text to be, and I'm hating the look of my tests right now. We're going to do that next time we're allowed to refactor, but we're not allowed to refactor until then. I've got to spell app correctly. And we should be read in a good way. And we are read in a good way. It expects 0 to be 1, so our slime is caught. If we actually go in here and change this slime from the 0 slime to the 1 slime, we would make this test pass, but we'd make the other test fail, so that's not our answer. What we need to do is something more general, but we can't do anything in this code because we don't know how many pins were rolled, which means we need to change the code out here so we have that information. And that's easy. We just pass a parameter, pins, which is from the ng-repeat. If we decided to list 11 different roles with different numbers, we would have different add roles with the constant there, but we don't have to do that because we used ng-repeat here. And that's good. If we hadn't done that and had done it the ugly way but first, we could always fix it during a refactoring fit, which now means we can put that information in here. And, okay, so there are many things we can do. We can say if pins equals 1 or 0, then scope.roles gets 0. And if pins equals 1, then scope.roles gets 1. Or we could just generalize. And this is the thing. You slime when it's the easiest thing to do. And you generalize when sliming is more painful. So I changed that to pins, and now our code is working, and it's green, and it's time to write another test. And there's an obvious next test to write here. It should display 2 roles. Oh, you know what? While we're green, remember I said how ugly and annoying this stuff is? I'm going to actually take that code there and bring it up here. And now we're going to define a couple of functions. Function role is going to get this language. It'll have a parameter pins, which will go here. I'm not adding functionality, I'm just refactoring. And function expect roles display to be some string . We'll put that in here, and we'll change that constant to a string. And now I could rewrite my test. Now I know you could write this function without using the function declaration form. I'm doing it for convenience. It may not run perfectly in some older IE browsers, but my development environments are all current, sophisticated, and at least the JScript that's running will not have the usual bugs or the real horror show bugs that you had elsewhere. But it would not be difficult at all to go back in our next refactoring and change that to using function expressions and assignments. But I'm not going to worry about that now because I want to benefit from hoisting and get this thing going and working. Okay, so I'm going to roll a 0 and expect roles display to be 0. And that should replace those tests. And we're green. And now I'm going to roll a 1 and expect my roles display to be 1. And save it, and we're still green. And now let's go ahead and roll 0 for this test and roll 1 for this test, and then expect our roles display to be bracket 0, 1. And we should be red, and we are. 1 should be 0, 1. It's only remembering the last one we throw. We really want it to somehow add it. Now, we can do this in a bunch of ways. We have roles. We could keep that maintained and add something to it. We can look at the number of roles. We could keep track of things. But there's an obvious way to do this because roles is already here. And there's an obvious generalization that just works. And we're green. If you saw a slimier way to do it, you're better than I was. This looked too easy, so I went for it. It looked easier than anything I could think of and simpler than any other code I could write. This forced me into a generalization, which now allows us to display 2 roles. My experience is that when you've generalized 1 to 2, you kind of expect it to work all the way down unless there are some edge cases. And I don't see any edge cases here. Well, there are. There are edge cases when you get past the end of a game, but we don't even have the language to express that yet. And you'll see we can make it impossible for you to hit the button at all when it's going to be at the end of the game. That'll be our dessert for later on. So now we're really done with data entry. Let's see if we can have the reset functionality working, and then we're done with this section and this part of the video. So let's go ahead. It should display an empty list on reset. So now when we're clicking on the reset button, app.find.reset.click, we would expect the roles display to be the empty list again. And I know, I got to fix that dot there. And close the brackets. And we should be red. No, we're not. We're not red. We're green. We're done. We don't need to write any more code. No, that's not the case. Here's the trick. If you've never seen a test go red, then you can't trust the test. If you've never seen the test in red, it's not testing anything. Why isn't it testing anything here? Well, that's because initially we've already established that the list is going to be empty. So we need to do something to make it not empty so that we're actually testing reset to do something. Now it's red, it forces us to write code, and now we're able to use the test to trust it. If the test starts green and you've never seen it red, it's not a test. It doesn't count. All right, so when we click on the reset whatever thingy it is, we're going to use the reset function. But you don't have a reset function, Andrew. That's correct. Let's make a reset function. $scope.reset gets function of scope.roles.push gets empty. Okay, I guess we don't need the extra brackets here. Why isn't that working? Because I don't want to push it. Now it's working. See how it keeps us from making mistakes? We would just leave that text and that cruft in there and then run into the bug later on and stare at it for hours, and it just looks okay to us, so we would just go ahead and do it. This just throws the red in your face until you make it work. And now we've got code. We've got code that's allowing us to initialize this application, to actually add roles to the application by clicking on the buttons, and then to reset it when we've clicked the wrong buttons. There's obviously more work that could be done, but this is enough for now. Well, okay, so let's take a look at the fruits of our labor. We have an application, and it looks like hell because we've spent virtually no effort looking at issues concerning its appearance. We said we'd leave that to the designers to work on later on. But we can do a few things. For one thing, we can't see any of the buttons or the clickable doodads. We can easily just take care of that. Andrew, are you writing code without tests? Well, yes in a sense, but no in another sense. The design features of this project are beyond the scope of our test drive. We're going to be able to make all the changes we want. The only requirement to the design elements is that we don't break the build. So what happens when I did those things? Well, you're a lousy designer, Greenberg, but let's see what we've got. We've got these numbers, and these are our pins, and we can click on them, and they will actually show up here in the log, and I can hit a lot of 10s because I'm a great bowler, and I can hit reset to start over, and I can throw more pins in, and I can reset it. Now, this isn't exactly going to be Video Game of the Year, but look at what we've accomplished, and look how well driven we've gotten through the code using TDD. Okay, let's recap. In this part, we built out the development environment and our Scaffold application thanks to Yeoman. We configured the Karma test runner to work in that context, and we created an Angular integration test subject which worked fine in our Karma test runner. We could then use that to write integration tests and drive out a data entry feature in our application using TDD. While doing the TDD, we learned to slime, that is, to do the simplest thing that could possibly work, even if it only meant writing a pure constant in our code to make the application go from red to green. If we wanted to write more generic code, we needed to write more specific tests that force us to generalize. When we generalize and our test gets more generic, we then go on to the next test that you can think of. And when you're done thinking of writing tests and you can't think of another to write, you're done with your application. So that's the idea. As the tests get more specific, our code will get more generic, and our application will be more complete. And so with that, we entered it into source control, and we're done with this part. Don't miss the next part where we actually develop the bowling algorithm and implement it. You'll see it's slightly different than the traditional TDD Kata for the reason that it has to generate not only a final score, but a frame-by-frame scoring of the application. I look forward to seeing you then. In the meanwhile, I'm Andrew Greenberg. My email is wizardwerdna, wizardwerdna@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. This is Superheroic Bowling, the classic kata in AngularJS.